When my mom sold my flat to pay for my brother's college after forging my signature, am I the jerk for cutting her off? I'm Sarah, and to be honest, my relationship with my 52-year-old mother, Brenda, has never been easy. My parents' divorce when I was about 8 years old caused everything to fall apart, even though we never really clicked. Bill, my father, would have been 58. M was a decent man, but he had had enough. She simply wore him down by constantly berating him about money and how he wasn't doing enough. He finally had enough and walked out. Mom didn't spend any time playing the victim when I moved home with her after the divorce. It wasn't like that at all, despite what she told everyone about Dad leaving us. He continued to be involved, visit when he could, and pay child support. However, Mom would view the child support checks, scoff, and remark things like, "This is all your father thinks you're worth." Even though I now see that my father was doing everything he could, it troubled me as a child and gave me the impression that he wasn't doing enough. When Mom met Tom, who is now 53, things became even worse. M, an independent contractor who appeared to be doing well for himself. After they had Jake, my half-brother, I felt as though I had vanished. Most of the time, I was left to fend for myself while Mom prepared these elaborate meals for Tom and Jake. There might occasionally be no food in the refrigerator when I got home. In my own house, I felt like a ghost. But when I discovered that Mom was having an affair with Tom, the real bomb went off. And it wasn't a little incident or a suspicion. I happened upon it. It was a full-fledged, confrontational type of revelation. I was just a few months away from graduating high school at the age of 17 when it all began. I have a clear memory of the day. I had gone out with several buddies on a Saturday. I got home a little early than normal since we finished up sooner than I had anticipated. I just thought it would be a calm afternoon. But as soon as I went through the door, I sensed something was off. When the home is too quiet, like abnormally silent, you know. It was just like that. I yelled, "Mom, Tom!" But nobody answered. I heard it at that point. Upstairs, voices. I initially believed that Mom may be only conversing on the phone or anything. Then I heard someone laughing. The type of laugh she used to have with Tom when they were acting all sexy and obscene, not just any laugh. However, it didn't sound like Tom was the source of her laughter this time. Even though my heart was racing, I was unable to stop it. Making as little noise as possible, I began to crawl up the steps. As I approached her bedroom door, the sounds became more distinct. Then I heard it. It was a man's voice again. It wasn't Tom's either. I paused directly in front of her door. It was just open enough for me to view it without drawing attention to myself. I spotted them as I peered through the opening. My mother and a stranger. As if they didn't give a damn, they were sprawled out on the bed, enveloped in the covers. I went cold. At first, I was unable to really comprehend what I was witnessing. What I was seeing was simply too much for my brain to process. What's the worst? They were giggling. They were laughing as if their actions were nothing, as if it were a casual Saturday afternoon event. They both looked up at the same moment, so I must have made a noise. My mother's face became white. She hurried to cover the man and herself with the blanket. He only grinned. He made no effort to conceal what was taking place. He gave me a look as if I were the one who wasn't supposed to be there, and that I was ruining his day. "Hold on, Sarah." Mom stumbled. "This isn't what it looks like." However, it was just what it appeared to be. They caught her, and she couldn't get out of it by talking her way out of it. I said nothing at all. I was unable to. I simply turned and took off running. Without turning around, I ran out of the home and down the stairs. My thoughts were racing. All I could think about as my hands began to shake was, what the hell did I just see? I spent what seemed like hours strolling about the area in an attempt to understand it. I had no idea what to do. A part of me wanted to go back and urge Tom to blow it all up and yell at her. On the other hand, I simply felt numb, as if I couldn't bear the consequences. So I didn't immediately return home. I spent the night at a friend's house and kept it a secret from everyone. I was unable to. It was too hefty to utter aloud. I returned the next morning. I had to do it, not because I wanted to. I was still required to reside there. There was still a way to live in that house. Being aware of what I know, it seemed as if nothing had happened when I returned. In the kitchen, Mom pretended that it was an ordinary day, as if I hadn't just discovered her infidelity the day before. I didn't give her any recognition. After locking the door and heading directly to my room, I just sat there and gazed at the wall. I no longer had the same way of looking at her. A switch seems to have flipped. It all felt different. It felt as if I had lost all remaining respect for her. The relationship between her and I was essentially over after that. I didn't talk to her much. I was private. I spent much of my time in my room and only out when absolutely necessary. I was unable to confront her once again. I knew one thing, but I wasn't prepared for the struggle. I was eagerly awaiting the day when I could finally leave that house. I kept my head down for a few weeks, doing the routine and avoiding her at all costs. However, I couldn't get rid of that instinct. The one who told me I had to go. The issue was that I had no idea where to go. Then I recalled something my father had said some time ago. A flat. When I was preparing to move out after high school, Dad had mentioned in passing that he had hoped to arrange something for me. I didn't give it much thought at the time, but now I do. It seemed like a lifeline now. I chose to give him a call. I had been gathering courage all day, and it was a Friday after school. As I phoned his number, my heart was pounding. His voice was as steady as usual when he picked up, as if he was unaware of what was happening. "Hello, child. What is going on?" I paused for a while, uncertain of where to begin. "Dad, hello. I need to discuss something essential with you." A pause occurred. Naturally. "What's happening?" I inhaled deeply. "I'd like to live with you. Mom is no longer able to accommodate me." There was a pause, and I prepared myself for his answer. When he did speak, though, it was just what I needed to hear. "You can, of course." "Sarah. All right, we'll work it out. Do not be concerned." I felt an unbelievable sense of relaxation. I was afraid he wouldn't want to get involved and would say no. But my dad wasn't like that. He didn't complicate things or ask a lot of questions. He just said, yes, as if that were the world's most natural thing. He went on, "I'll, come get you tomorrow. Gather the necessities." I packed as much as I could into a few of suitcases that evening. Leaving the majority of my belongings behind didn't even concern me. All I wanted to do was go. I heard nothing from Mom. She pretended not to see me packing. Perhaps she didn't. A portion of her, I believe, simply didn't care. I was no longer a part of her universe. She had Jake and Tom. The following day, Dad arrived on schedule. While I loaded my stuff into the car, I liked that he didn't ask for specifics. We didn't chat much on the way to his apartment. He simply drove. I felt like I could breathe again once we arrived. Dad knocked on the door later that night after I had moved into my new room. Calm as always, he entered and sat on the side of the bed. "I've been thinking," he added, "but I know things have been tough. Do you recall the flat I described earlier?" Curious to see where this was headed, I nodded. "I had intended to present it to you after you graduated, but I believe this is a wonderful moment to do so. You are worthy of having your own, particularly in light of all that has been going on with your mother." I was taken aback. "Hold on. I'm getting an apartment from you?" "Yeah. he answered, grinning slightly. "It's yours, but it's not really fancy. Now that you're 17, I want you to have it. One thing, only one thing. Since your mother is still legally in charge of you, her name must appear on the documents for the time being. However, we'll transfer it to you in full when you reach 18. It seemed unbelievable to me. My entire life seemed to be improving all of a sudden, even though I hadn't even thought of this as a possibility. It felt like a dream come true to think about having a home of my own away from the commotion. The next weekend, we went to see it. It was ideal for me. However, it wasn't too big. It was only a tiny one-bedroom apartment, far enough from my mother to allow me to breathe, yet close enough to my school to allow me to complete the year while strolling around the flat. I had the unshakable impression that something fresh was about to happen. A better one. Naturally, there was the entire problem of the papers having Mom's name on it. We had no other option because, legally, she still had custody. Dad told me, however, that it was just temporary, that it would be all mine once I became 18. I had faith in him. I had never been disappointed by him before. Things proceeded really swiftly once we signed the paperwork. I divided my time between setting up and preparing the new apartment and Dad's house. I felt as though I was at last taking charge of my own life. And it was wonderful. Mom didn't give a damn. She was probably simply pleased that I wasn't there to remind her of what I had saw her doing. She never sought to become engaged or question me about the flat. To be honest, I didn't mind at all that I seemed to have vanished from her life. I wanted to avoid her as much as possible. It had been refreshing to live with Dad. Unlike his mother, he wasn't domineering or dominating. He was there for me whenever I needed him, but he also gave me space. Together, we would watch TV, have supper, and simply discuss life. It seemed typical. It was something I hadn't felt in a while. Dad brought up the flat once more during one of those dinners. "You've done a great job balancing everything," he added to Sarah. "It's a good alternative if you ever want to rent out the flat once you start college. Having that type of supplementary money is beneficial." It was as if my mind suddenly became clear. The apartment was excellent, but it wasn't really feasible for me to continue living there once I relocated for school to the opposite side of town. Considering how expensive college was, renting it out may help me pay for my expenditures. Though I felt it was a good concept in the back of my mind, I assured Dad I would give it some thought. For the moment, everything looked to be coming together, even though I had no idea that the apartment would later become the focal point of a very other storm. My father supported my independence and a destiny that seemed entirely up to me. When my father died a few years later, everything fell apart once more. The feeling of losing someone like that is difficult to describe. My father has been my support throughout my life, the only one I could rely on. I was therefore very affected when he became ill. Cancer is a vicious disease. He moved more quickly than I had anticipated. There was a day when he was fine. The next day, I was seeing his increasing weakness. In order to care for him, I resigned my career. There was no doubt at all. For him, I would do everything. I was utterly destroyed by the time he died. After everything I had done to care for him, he was gone. The flat was now totally in my name and belonged to me, and the fact that I had a place to stay should have given me some relief. Instead, I simply felt disoriented. It was at that point that my mother began to reappear. Remember, after I moved out, we hadn't talked much. She never exhibited any interest in my life, even though she knew I had a house of my own. After I left her house, she never even inquired about my well-being. I wasn't sure what to think when she abruptly contacted me following the loss of my father. There was a part of me that hoped Mom had changed, that perhaps losing Dad had made her realize that life was too short to waste on all the garbage she had done to me. I suppose I felt susceptible because I was mourning and wanted to think she was attempting to support me. It appeared to be okay at first. She gave me a couple calls to see how I was doing and to check in. I didn't push her away, but I also wasn't exactly friendly. Even if it was her, it was good to have someone inquire about me for once, because I felt lonely. The discussions were somewhat superficial. Neither she nor I ever mentioned anything from the past. To be honest, I didn't believe she would ever be prepared to accept responsibility for her role in things, and I wasn't prepared to get into all of that. But shortly after it began modest, things began to change. She casually brought up Jake's preparations for college and the high cost of tuition during one of her phone conversations. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. I simply nodded and said things like, "Yeah, college can be costly," believing that to be the end of it. However, following that, money appeared to be the topic of every discussion. She gave subtle clues about how difficult life was for her and Tom, about how the economy was making things more difficult. Since I wasn't seeking for it, I wasn't really noticing it at first. Then she asked me directly for assistance. "Could you please provide us a loan so we can pay for Jake's college tuition?" "One day," she said on the phone. For a while, I sat there in shock, trying to take in what I had just heard. My mind was still in the pondering phase. It felt like she was only using me as an ATM, albeit perhaps this was her attempt to mend our relationship. "Hold on, what?" Not sure if I heard her correctly, I said. "You must have some extra cash coming in because you have the flat and are currently renting it out." She drifted off as if I was meant to jump in and volunteer, even though Tom and I are trying our hardest to help Jake get all of his scholarships set up. I didn't. I felt as like the rug had been yanked out from under me, and I simply sat there in quiet for a while. As a bereaved father, I was still attempting to understand what my life would be like without him. In addition, my mother, with whom I hadn't had a meaningful contact for years, was requesting money from me. I am unable to assist you with that. When I did say it, I tried to speak steadily. I'm only now beginning to recover from all that happened with Dad. The uneasy quiet on the line seemed to indicate that she didn't think I would say no. When she spoke again, I could sense the change in tone. She answered in a strained voice, "I understand. With everything going on, I just figured you would want to assist your brother. After that call, I didn't fall for the ruse. Things became strange between us. She reduced the frequency of her calls, and when she did, they were brief, and to the point where I could sense her retreating. To be honest, I didn't mind at all. I couldn't handle her guilt trips because I was too exhausted from everything else. However, I was surprised when she went above and above. I received a note from my renter at the unit a few weeks after that phone chat. They were yelling that they had been served with an eviction notice. I phoned them back to find out what was going on, since I was really perplexed and hadn't given any notice to leave or even considered selling the property. My flat had been sold, and not only sold, it turned out. I was not even aware that it had been sold. Initially, I assumed that this must be some kind of fraud or error. This couldn't be real, could it? I called my lawyer right away, and we got to work reviewing the documents. The bomb dropped at that moment. My mother had falsified my signature to sell the flat, and her name was still on the documents from when I was a minor. I was blown away, totally caught off guard. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Who, after all, does that? Who doesn't notify their children when they sell their apartment? When I phoned her, I was trembling. How on earth did you accomplish that? When she took up the phone, I yelled, "Have you actually sold my flat?" She didn't even appear to be affected. It didn't seem like a huge problem to me. Her voice was gratingly composed as she spoke. Since Jake needed the money for school, you weren't utilizing it. It only sat there. I couldn't speak. This was no little miscommunication. I lived in this apartment. Dad gave me the location. The location that should have been mine. She just sold it as if it were hers to do with what she pleased. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to keep it together. It's unbelievable that you accomplished this. My voice trembled with rage as I spoke. You were not entitled. In actuality, my name was still on the documents. That made it okay, she remarked. In addition, it will benefit a worthy cause. That money is necessary for your brother. For me, it was it. It seemed unbelievable to me that my own mother had sold something that wasn't even hers to sell, falsified my signature, and went behind my back. For what purpose? To assist Jake. I didn't dislike him. It wasn't about him, though. This concerned her going too far, something I didn't even believe was feasible. It wasn't hers that she sold. My dad gave me something, and then, like it didn't matter. I had to address her face to face, because I knew I had to do something about it. That same day, I took a car to her residence. The entire time, my mind was racing. I knew I had to say something, but I wasn't sure what I would say. I wasted no time in getting there. I approached the door directly and hardly knocked before entering. She pretended everything was all right as she hummed to herself in the kitchen. Mine, on the other hand, was upside down. As like she hadn't just pulled the rug out from under me, she glanced up and grinned. Oh. Sarah, hello. Why do you come by? She was so nonchalant that I was shocked, behaving as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't secretly sold my flat. My pulse was racing, and I was so furious that I was having trouble speaking clearly. Do you genuinely believe that what you did was acceptable? I lost it and sold my flat without informing anyone. She didn't appear as guilty as I had assumed, but her grin dimmed. Sarah, I informed you that Jake needed school aid, but you weren't utilizing it. She shrugged as if it didn't matter. All it did was sit there, empty. What I was hearing was unbelievable. As if it didn't matter, she was acting as though she was selling the flat for a little issue. Mom, you didn't sell it. I owned that flat. My signature was falsified by you. By now, I was virtually screaming. She leaned on the counter with her arms folded. For someone who had just committed fraud, he was still far too composed. In a technical sense, the documents still bore my name. I am also your mother. I acted in the family's best interests. What was best for the family was that sentence. I wanted to shout because of it. She wasn't helping the family in any way. This was what she was doing for herself. Jake is being used as an excuse. It was unbelievable to me that she was dismissing it as insignificant. You don't know what you did. My voice shook with rage as I spoke. No one's best interests were at stake here. It was your belief that you could steal something that wasn't rightfully yours. She rolled her eyes as if I were exaggerating. You're going overboard. Sarah, it's just money. It was necessary for school for your sibling. You no longer need that place, and you have your own life today. By now my hands were trembling. I inhaled deeply, making an effort to keep things together. Mom, you made up my name. Do you even realize that's against the law? Do you really believe that you can simply take anything from me and use it as your own piggy bank? She sighed, obviously fed up with the discussion. Sarah, I'm your mom. I was surprised to see how unappreciative you were about this. I tried to assist your sibling. You'll be all right. You're never thankful. She dared to accuse me of being unappreciative. What I was hearing was unbelievable. This went beyond her typical self-centeredness. This was illegal. She was also behaving as though I was the issue. I said, I've already called my attorney, and her expression shifted at once. Gone is that cool, arrogant attitude. She stood up straight, and for the first time, I noticed that she was genuinely anxious. "Your lawyer, what do you mean?" Despite her best efforts to be informal, I could detect the sharpness in her voice as she inquired. "In other words, I'm going to sue you," I said in a chilly tone. "You were dishonest. Mom, this isn't a simple miscommunication. You will be held accountable for selling anything that wasn't yours." Her face lost its color and she remained silent for a moment. I believe she at last recognized how deeply ingrained she was. "Sarah." With a somewhat more urgent tone, she replied, "You don't have to do this right now. We are related. We can resolve this." I felt all the rage rising up again as I shook my head. "No, we are unable to. As soon as you faked my name, you made sure of it. Did you not give it a second thought? You showed no concern for my needs or desires. It was all about you, and I've had enough of you stepping all over me." She seemed to be trying to find out how to speak her way out of this, since she remained silent for a while. I had no intention of it getting this far. At last, she stated that I was only attempting to assist Jake. I also believed that you believed you could achieve anything you desired. I cut you off. You were indifferent to the repercussions. You never do. However, you won't get away with it this time. She yelled after me, but I turned and started to leave the kitchen. "Hold on, Sarah. Don't do this, please. We are related. Do you wish to avoid going to court about this?" At the door, I paused and gave her one more look. You gave me no other option, even though I didn't want any of this. I left without turning around. My entire world seemed to be collapsing. However, I also experienced an odd feeling of clarity. I was aware of my obligations. This was not something I was going to let her get away with. This time, she had pushed me too far, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were a haze of emails, phone conversations with my attorney, and document collection. I had a strong case, according to my attorney. All of her actions, every falsified paper, and every dubious element was being exposed. I had to keep moving forward even if it was exhausting. I was battling for more than just my residence. I was defending myself and all she had stolen from me, both materially and emotionally. I didn't have a choice, but I wasn't prepared for the next court struggle. The last update. After months of back-and-forth court filings and unending anxiety, justice was finally served. I won the case in court. It is true that my mother falsified my signature in order to sell my apartment, and her actions were not only against the law but also blatantly dishonorable. After all the bustle, I was both relieved and exhausted when I received the news. At last, it was over. The decision was unambiguous. Mom was convicted of fraud and forgery. She had sold something that wasn't hers, went behind my back, and acted as though it didn't exist. Money wasn't the only factor. It had to do with trust, or what remained of it. It didn't matter now, though. I didn't want to lose everything my father had given me, and she was going to prison. When I was informed of the judge's ruling, I wasn't immediately struck by it. It seemed unreal, as like this couldn't possibly be true. I didn't even want things to get to this point. After all, who wants to imprison their own mother? However, I was also aware that this was the result of her behavior. I couldn't ignore the line she crossed, and it was no longer just about me. It was about defending the moral high ground. Mom made an effort to seem tough throughout the trial, as if she still had the advantage, but toward the end, her eyes were filled with terror. She was coming to terms with the fact that she had lost. I didn't feel pleased or victorious when they gave her her punishment. I felt devoid. I didn't think our relationship could ever get back on track because she was going to jail for fraud. I didn't want it to. She had to deal with the repercussions of her decision. She was worried about more than just the flat, though. There was another matter to attend to: Tom. You see, Tom was completely unaware of what had been happening during all of this. He was unaware of the apartment transaction, the deception, or the falsified documentation. More significantly, though, he was unaware of the affair. I had been keeping that secret for far too long, and I finally caught my mother all those years ago. And I knew I couldn't contain it any longer after everything that had transpired. Tom needed to know the truth now. I had no idea how to go about it. How, after all, can you inform someone that their spouse has cheated on them? That for years she had been deceiving them? After much deliberation, I concluded that ripping off the Band-Aid was the wisest course of action. No matter how painful it was, he had a right to know the truth. So I went to see Tom. I simply came out with it after some awkward small conversation after we had sat down. "I have something to tell you, Tom. It will also be difficult to hear." He gave me a perplexed look, but he could see I was serious. "What is it?" he inquired. I inhaled deeply. "I found my mother cheating on you when I was 17 years old a few years ago. At the time, I kept it to myself since I wasn't sure how to tell you. However, I can no longer contain it after everything that has transpired. You must be aware." His face became white. The shock struck him like a brick, as I could see. She betrayed me." He stumbled as if he was having trouble understanding what he was saying. When I described everything. On the day I arrived home early, I noticed her with an unknown man. She dismissed it with a joke, and I had been silent for years because I was unsure of how to handle it. I told him how deeply it had affected me, but I also told him that I had come to the realization that I could no longer let her falsehoods to rule my life in the wake of the fraud and the court case. For a while, Tom just sat there and gazed at the table. His hands curled into fists, and I could see the rage rising in his eyes. I didn't know. At last, he muttered, "I didn't know she could do all of this." I remained silent. How could I respond? I couldn't really make his life any easier. She defrauds you of the flat first, and now I find out. I've been deceived by her for years. Almost to himself, he whispered. I could feel the agony in his eyes when he glanced up at me. "I appreciate you informing me. Thank you, but I wish I'd known sooner." Following that discussion, things proceeded swiftly. Tom submitted a divorce petition. He was unable to remain with her. Not with all that had been revealed. The affair comes after the scam and the forgery. Their marriage was obviously finished. In all honesty, I believe he was eager to end his relationship with her. As she had done with me, she had done the same to him. And at last, he recognized her true self. She ultimately lost everything. Her marriage had ended. She was incarcerated and no longer had a relationship with me. I wish I could claim that it gave me a sense of fulfillment, but I didn't. It was merely depressing. Everything. I utilized the money I received from the apartment sale to purchase my own home, a location that was all mine. No conditions. It seemed like a new beginning. After all the turmoil, I really needed this. My mother was convicted, and I haven't talked to her since. I don't intend to be honest. What she accomplished cannot be undone. Some things are simply too damaged to be fixed. Although we're not very close, Tom and I have occasionally stayed in touch. I believe he is only attempting to reconstruct his life. I can't blame him either. Finding out someone you trusted has been lying to you all along is difficult. Jake is doing okay too. We occasionally speak now that he is a college student. He had no idea what his mother had done, nor do I hold him responsible for any of it. He's probably as astonished by it all as I am. Additionally, he is attempting to determine how to proceed. We are trying to establish a connection, but it is difficult because of all that has transpired. That's all then. That's the current situation. After a lengthy journey, I've finally reached a point where I feel like I can breathe normally again. Mom is incarcerated. I'm going on with my life now that Tom is free of her. I got it, even if that's not the finale I had in mind.